signed the Rolling Stones in Paris, again for tax reasons. This was to do with mixed tax reasons. So the Rolling Stones had to be signed in Paris. And the day this was supposed to happen, CBS had a guy who sort of looked after the Paris office for CBS, who was an Englishman, but he had a French name. His name was Peter de Rougemont, but he was an English guy. And he was in his 60s, and he'd been in Paris for probably 40 years, or been in France for 40 years, and based in Paris most of that time. And he was, I had never met anybody, to call him a bon vivant would be an understatement. I mean, he knew everything there was to know about French food and French wine. And in the twilight of his career, had very much been retained to sort of make sure that if somebody from CBS, whether it was the head of CBS or Bill Paylor was in Paris, that they went to the right restaurant, had the right food, were well looked after and everything else. So when it was announced that the Rolling Stones was going to be signed in Paris, I said to Peter, Peter, we got to have a fantastic dinner to celebrate this, and we want to, obviously the Stones will be there with wives, girlfriends, hangers-on. There's quite a few people from CBS that we need to have at this dinner. Obviously yourself, your family, and we've got Prince Rupert Lowenstein, who is the Rolling Stones advisor, and he'll have a few people with him. So I reckon there's going to be probably, say, 40 or 50 people for this dinner. And he said, well, what sort of dinner do you want? So I said, well, there is no budget. I mean, it's a huge deal. I said, so you can just go balmy. You can do whatever you like. Just make it the greatest dinner that Paris has ever seen, right? He said, is that my objective? So I said, yeah, make it the greatest dinner Paris has ever seen. And I said, Prince Rupert, you're probably the gold medal when it comes to food and wine. I said, Prince Rupert's, he's definitely silver, so, and he's on your shoulder, so it's got to be really good. And not many people know what Prince Rupert Lowenstein looks like, but he looks like Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, he's literally about 5 foot tall, and if he fell over, he'd be the same height. And nobody's quite sure how he got the title Prince Rupert Lowenstein. But I used to call him Bert, because I say, Bert, you arrived on these shores as Bert Lowenstein, and by the time you'd gone from Dover to London, somehow you become Prince Rupert Lowenstein, right? So I used to tease him, but he was a lovely old guy, and you could tease him, but he was very close with Mick, and he had a lot of influence over the Stones. Anyway, so Peter, I said to Peter, so how's the couple of days? So how's the dinner coming along, Peter? He said, unbelievable. He said, I've got the fish guy from Marseille. He said, I've got the cheese man from the Ardennes. He said, I've got the lamb man from Lyon. He said, I brought in the greatest chefs from around France. Rather than have like one chef in Paris, I brought the best chefs in their field from all over France to put this dinner together. This is going to be the greatest dinner that Paris has ever seen. Oh shit, this is probably costing a fortune flagging these chefs for their assistant. Hey, that's okay, right? So I'm telling Prince Rupert about it. I said, hey, this dinner's going to be something else. I said, you might not want to have lunch that day because it's going to be something else. Anyway, there were a few minor issues. We decided the dinner was going to be at 8 o'clock. There were a few minor issues that needed to be sorted out in the contract. So, I think it was a Friday afternoon. And people were all locked in the room. The lawyers are locked in the room. Mick and Keith were in there. Prince Rupert was in there. All the CBS lawyers were in there. And there was a lot of arguing going backwards and forwards about tiny little points, right, before the contract was signed. It went on and on and on, and it got to about 6 o'clock. And somebody came in with a message for me saying, Peter de Rougemont's outside, I'd like to have a word with you. So I went outside and I said, what is it, Peter? He said, it's 6 o'clock, dinner's at 8. Just wanted to remind you guys, 6 o'clock, dinner's at 8. And I said, Peter, don't worry about it. We're just a couple of little points and we'll be done. About 6:30, get another note. Peter would like to have a word with you. So I go outside. He said, Paul, dinner is at 8 o'clock. And I said, Peter, we're trying to sign the Rolling Stones. He said, I know, but dinner's at 8 o'clock. I just want you to be clear, dinner is at 8. Not 9, 8. So I said, okay, we're doing our best, but there are just a few little points. Anyway, about 10 minutes after that, I see Prince Rupert sitting there, and the same girl comes in, puts a note in front of Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert opens it up, looks at it, hands it to me. It says, Dear Prince Rupert, my name is Peter de Rougemont. We haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, but I understand that you are very interested in food and drink, as am I, and please could I have a quiet word with you outside. So Prince Rupert goes outside, and I thought, well, I better go too, because I'm not sure what's happening here, so I go out as well. Prince Rupert's got his very nice, he always immaculately dressed in a beautiful suit, right? So Peter de Rougemont says to him, Prince Rupert, I'm Peter de Rougemont. He said, I have organised the celebration dinner for this evening, he said, which is due to start at 8 o'clock. And it's now 7 o'clock, and you know, everybody I'm sure will want to change and freshen up. And he said, dinner is at 8. And Prince Rupert said, Peter, look, you know, this is a very big deal for Mick and Keith. Still some issues that have got to be, you know, finished. And you know, these guys are, after all, these are world stars. These, you know, stars of rock and roll. And with that, de Rougemont completely lost it. I've never seen, the guy was, you know, a calm English gentleman, he completely lost it. And he grabbed Lowenstein by the lapels and literally picked him up and shook him. And he said, I know who Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are, and they may be big stars of rock and roll, but I've got 8 chefs who are the greatest stars of food and drink in France, waiting to serve dinner. And he put him down and he said, and you can tell those boys, these guys are bigger stars in France than they are, right? And Prince Rupert, I thought, and he looked at Peter and he said, Mr. de Rougemont, you're right. And we walked back in the room and he went, Keith, Mick, shut the fuck up, we're going to dinner.